All right, welcome everybody. I think this is part three of the Rambam series. I've put a previously recorded video that I did on the introduction to the Mishneh Torah. I put it in the playlist, so if you've watched that, that'll be an introduction to this. If not, you can watch it after or not at all, whatever you want to do. But I don't think I labeled that part three, so I think this is part three, and that's just inserted in there. So anyway, we're going to be talking about Mishneh Torah today, and there's a lot of material to go through. Share screen, share sound in case we go to YouTube. All right, you guys see Mishneh Torah here, Yad Hazakah? Is that showing on the screen?
Yes,
Yes.
Rabbi.
Okay, good. So I refer to it as Mishneh Torah. Don't confuse that with Mishnah. Mishnah is from the Talmud. Mishnah plus Gemara equals Talmud. This is like Mishneh, as they do with like the second book that you need. We have the written Torah, then we have the Mishneh Torah. This is where you'll get the halakha from. Also called Yad HaHazakah, second to the Torah or Book of the Strong Hand. This is what Yad HaHazakah means, the strong hand. So Mishneh Torah, second to the Torah, emphasizes its role as the oral laws codification. This was the only name that Rambam gave it, was Mishneh Torah. Don't confuse Mishnah with Mishneh. The Chazal called Deuteronomy the second Torah, meaning like Mishneh Torah. And I guess in Greek, that's what Deuteronomy means. Not really familiar with Greek, but this is what I'm told. Deuteronomy means it's like the second Torah. So Rambam called it Mishneh Torah because the first Torah is the Torah Shebektav, the written Torah, the five books of Moses. And the Mishneh Torah is Torah Shibal Peh, oral law. This is the codification of it, completely codified. So now all you need are those two books, Torah and Mishneh Torah. So Yad HaHazakah, the strong hand, this was added later, not by Rambam and not in his lifetime. So he never heard it referred to as Yad HaHazakah. Referencing that Yad has the gematria of 14, even though Rambam refers to Mishneh Torah as one book, it actually has 14 volumes. He seems to be fond of the number 14. Remember, there are 14 principles in Sefer HaMitzvot for him to consider something a Torah commandment. It has to meet 14 principles, 14 boxes that have to be checked in order for him to count a mitzvah as an actual mitzvah. And he was also born on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. Some people say it's sort of a coincidence, even though I don't really buy into that. So also in Deuteronomy 34:12, this is the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses died, it said, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. For what Moses did for the Jewish people." The Hebrew, it uses the term Yad HaZakah. I think it's in the last video I opened up the JPS Tanakh, and the translation there says, "What a mighty and strong." Let me see, I think it said a bookmark on it. With all the great might and awesome power that Moses displayed before all Israel. But if you look in the Hebrew, it says Yad HaZakah, with a strong hand. So that's what this means when it said, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses for what Moses did for the Jewish people." In Hebrew, it uses the term Yad HaZakah, with a mighty or strong hand. Some translations vary and say great might and awesome power that Moses displayed. That's what I just read. On his grave, it supposedly says, "From Moshe to Moshe, there never was another like Moshe." And I didn't understand what that meant in the beginning. I'm like, which Moshe are we talking about? But I figured it out here. Because on his grave, it says from Moshe to Moshe, meaning from Moshe Rabbeinu to Moshe ben Maimon, which is Rambam. There never was another prophet like Moshe, meaning Rambam. And then at the end there, it says Yad HaZakah on the grave. So It's talking about Mishneh Torah, referred to as this Yad Hazakah, meaning from Moses to Rambam, there's never been another one like Rambam because of what Rambam did for the Jewish people. And what did he do for the Jewish people? He gave us Mishneh Torah, referred to here as Yad HaZakah, quote from the actual Torah. So, with that type of veneration, it made sense to use the term that was applied to Moses to Rambam. Again, that was not a name that he gave it. They burned his books. They were like, "How dare anybody do something like this?" And then fast forward a little bit, and so after he died, and look at what they're putting on his grave. They're comparing him to Moses because of that's the power, the great thing that he did for the Jewish people with this book, and they didn't even recognize it at the time. Hey, but it's got illustrations in it. The original manuscripts included diagrams. Remember, this is before the printing press, like the menorah's design, which influenced Kabbalistic traditions. This is actually where Chabad gets their straight arm diagonal Hanukkah. It's from a drawing that Rambam made in Mishneh Torah, which contradicts the depiction of the menorah on the Arch of Titus. So even Chabad says, uh, if you're not familiar, there's an arch when the Romans conquered um, Jerusalem. They took the menorah out. It's called the Arch of Titus. There's a picture of them carrying the menorah out. And the menorah, I don't see me on the screen, so I'm assuming you can see what I'm holding. The Hanukkah. See how it's curved? That's what's on the Arch of Titus. The people that actually picked it up and carried it out, they depicted themselves doing it. This is what it looked like. But if you've ever been to Hanukkah lighting at Chabad, they have like a straight diagonal arm. And that's because Rambam in his Mishneh Torah, he did a hand drawing of the menorah, and he made it. He drew it like Chabad has with straight arms. So that's what they use. Now Rambam was not trying to show the shape of it. You see the little decorations here in the arms? That's what he was trying to show in his drawing. He was trying to show the order of the decorations, not the shape of it. So Chabad has their Hanukkah based off of his hand drawing. Um, so then the question comes up, well, the people who actually saw it in real life, not 1,000 years later when Rambam drew this drawing, they said it was round. So even Chabad says, who are you going to believe, the Goyim that actually saw it or the Rambam? So they say if this is what Rambam says it was, then that's what it was. And that's why Chabad has the straight armed one. But again, Rambam wasn't making the point that it was straight, not round. He was just trying to show where on each arm were the decorations in what pattern. But they took it literally, and that's why they have that. Okay, so it's his life's masterwork, I guess, depending on who you ask. If you're more rational, more philosophically inclined, you might like his more Nevuchim, which we'll talk about next week, assuming we get through this whole process this week. If you're more legalistic and halakhically minded, then you're going to say Mishneh Torah is his life's masterwork. It's a comprehensive code of Jewish law written over 13 years from ages 32 to 45. It's the most complete halakhic compendium ever written to this very day. Not a single person in the last 800 years says, he did good, but I think I can top it. I can do it better. To this day, nobody has ever tried to duplicate it. It's the only one that covers all of it. So the most widely accepted book of Kodesh law of Jewish law, the most widely accepted is the Shulchan Aruch, but it only covers laws that apply today in the diaspora. It does not deal with laws of korbanot or purity and impurity. It only deals with things in the diaspora. We don't have a Sanhedrin in the diaspora. We don't have death penalty cases. We don't have animal sacrifices, but we don't need specific utensils for these sacrifices that we're not doing. So the Shulchan Aruch doesn't cover any of that. So if you want to know how that stuff works, you have to go to Mishneh Torah because it's the only one that deals with it. So that's the scope of the Mishneh Torah. It covers all of halakha, even laws not currently applicable. Temple service even has laws of Mashiach, even though some would argue that's not really a halakhic system. Is, is there laws for what makes someone the Mashiach? But it deals with the Messianic era, which again is something you're not going to find in places like the Shulchan Aruch. So it was very innovative. It systemized Torah and rabbinic law in clear Mishnaic Hebrew, unlike his other Arabic works that he did before and after. He used Hebrew letters to spell Arabic words. So you had to be fluent in Arabic to understand the language, which was later translated into Hebrew, so Hebrew speakers could read it. But this one he wrote in simple Hebrew that everyone would understand. So it didn't need to be translated, even though later it was translated into a more modern form. But originally it was in the most basic language that even the most uneducated people would understand. So the purpose of it was a definitive, organized code of Jewish law intended to replace the need for Talmud study and practical halakha. Remember back then, the only way you would know what's allowed and what's not is to ask your rabbi because he was the only one that was going through the actual Talmud, which, to study that a page a day takes 7.5 years, which, by the way, the Daf Yomi only started in like the 1920s, 1920, 1921. So back then, that wasn't even a thing of learning every day. And if you had multiple rabbis, sometimes they would be sharing the same Talmud. What happens when you need to move to a different section of it? So we have a different question we want to learn. So that was the only way people could learn. So now that you have Mishneh Torah, you can do it yourself. You don't have to sift through all the Agada and the Midrashim and what's considered prophecy. You just want the law. You don't even have to look at the debates about the law and try and figure out, well, what was the final ruling. He takes that and puts it in, extracts it from the Talmud, puts it here to where anybody can read it and get the law. And he also changed the where it was located. He organized it in a much more organized way, so you can find what you're looking for without having to sift through multiple different sections. I think this is the introduction. Yeah, okay. It's a very long introduction that he gives you. I think I only gave you here the last part of it, which is the most important part that anyone that wants to argue for Mishneh Torah needs to know. Keep in mind, most people they claim to go by the Shulchan Aruch, which means they've never read the Mishneh Torah. So, you'll hear them say things like, "Oh, you have to ask your rabbi. You got to be an expert. You can't understand it. It's nonsense." And this is the end of the introduction, and this is how you combat that. This is word for word, right out of the Sefer Hamad, the first book in the Mishneh Torah, where we find the introduction. This is Rambam's words himself. At this time, we have been beset by additional difficulties. Everyone feels financial pressure. The wisdom of our sages has become lost, uh, which sort of debunks the idea that 60,000 pages of literature has been memorized from person to person and passed down from every household and every generation until it was eventually written down. Um, well, even if that was the case, in the time of Rambam's life, the wisdom has become lost. So they didn't have it at that point. The comprehension of our men of understanding has become hidden. Therefore, those explanations, laws, and replies which the Gaonim, the generation before Rambam was a Rishon, his generation was the Rishonim. So the replies which the Gaonim composed and considered to be fully explained material have become difficult to grasp in our age, and only a select few comprehend these manners in a proper way. Okay, so if it's only a select few, then it makes sense that their students, how do you know they even understood it correctly when it was getting transmitted from the select few in the generation? This is why he says the vast majority of the people, they are not properly educated. Needless to say, there is confusion with regard to the Talmud itself, both the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmuds. The Sifri, the Sifra, um, and the Tosefta, as well as the Mechilta. These are the Baraitot. You see in the Gemara, it says, but the Baraita teaches, these are what they're talking about. Mishnaic era literature that's not in the Mishnah itself. It's called Baraitot, or a Baraita, singular. For they require a breadth of knowledge, a spirit of wisdom, and much time, which most people don't have, for appreciating the proper path regarding what is permitted and what is forbidden, and the other laws of the Torah. Therefore, I girded my loins, I, Moses, the son of Maimon of Spain. I relied upon the rock, blessed be he. I contemplated all these texts, meaning both Talmuds, the Yerushalmi and the Babli, all of the Baraitot, the Tosefta, the Sifri, the Sifra, and the Chilta. He went through all of it, which before that, you had the Rif. He just went through the Babylonian Talmud. He didn't go through the Jerusalem Talmud. The Rambam went through all of it. And he contemplated all these texts and sought to compose a work which would include the conclusions derived from all of these texts regarding the forbidden and the permitted, the pure and the impure, and the remainder of the Torah's laws, all in clear and concise terms, so that the entire oral law could be organized in a person's mouth without questions or objections. So even today, people act like the Babylonian Talmud, because it's the most popular one, is the only one that exists. But you see people like David Bar Haim bringing up things from the Yerushalmi, saying, well, we have a precedent here. This is what the people in the land, this is what they did, which is sometimes different than what you see the communities in Babylon saying they did, the Babylonian Talmud. So this is one of the things that Rambam did. He went through all of it. So it's not just the people of one community. Well, this is what they did. He brings in valid sources from other things that people don't usually go through, so that it can be organized in each person's mouth. Each person, this means you. This means anyone who reads Mishneh Torah. It's not limited to the elite, the ones that have the proper Mizorah or the correct understanding. This is for every individual. Instead of going through arguments, this one claiming this and another one claiming that, this text, Mishneh Torah, will allow for clear and correct statements based on the judgments that result from all the texts and explanations mentioned above, from the days of Rabbeinu HaKodesh until the present. This will make it possible for all the laws to be revealed, both to those of lesser stature and those of greater stature. This, to me, someone of greater stature means I come from a prestigious family, lots of rabbis in my family, I'm very intelligent, very well educated, lots of rabbis in my family, or those of lesser stature, people that are maybe not so intelligent, not so educated, come from the woods, whatever. Doesn't matter. Anybody, no matter what your background is, which one of these categories you fall into, it doesn't matter. It's going to be clear and concise terms so that anybody, even the lowest of the low, can understand this regarding every single mitzvah, and also the practices that were ordained by the sages and the prophets. Okay, so when he says mitzvah, he's talking about the mitzvot, the Torah commandments, and all the practices that were ordained by the sages and the prophets. This is the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, the halakha. So you'll be fluent in mitzvot and halachot with just the Torah and this book. To summarize, the intent of this text is that a person will not need another text at all with regard to any other Jewish law. And people always get mad when you quote this. They say, well, I want to read this other book. I like the Shulchan Aruch. I want to read this book that the Breslov rabbi wrote. Well, good. Go ahead. Read it. He's not saying you can't read another book. He's just saying that all becomes optional. If you want to know Torah commandments and the halakha to live as a frum Jew, you don't need any other book. If you want to read other books, fine. Enter the Guinness Book of World's Record for most books ever written by a single individual. That's what you want to do. But you're not required to. You can stick to Torah and Mishneh Torah and live a completely frum existence with regard to any Jewish law, including, you want to know how the Sota waters worked, something we don't do today, you can master that, things that are not even applicable today with any Jewish law, with just this book. This text will be a compilation of the entire oral law, a claim that no other book can make. Not even the Shulchan Aruch can tell you all of the laws. It doesn't even attempt. It completely is silent on things that you don't deal with in the diaspora. But this book will be a compilation of the entire oral law, including all the ordinances, customs, and decrees that were enacted from the time of Moses, our teacher, until the completion of the Talmud, as were explained by the Geonim in the text that they composed after the Talmud. Therefore, I have called this text Mishneh Torah, the second to the Torah. This is what people are so mad about. Like, what gives you the audacity to say this is second to the Torah? Rabbi's bigger than you never even attempted to do something like this. Well, I mean, it's on his grave today that rabbis bigger than the rabbis criticizing him say that he's kind of on the level of Moses because of what he achieved with this book. But this is what they were mad about in putting this in the introduction. With the intent that a person should first study the written law, this is the Torah, and then study this text and comprehend the entire oral law from it, without having to study any other texts between the two. That was his goal, a bold claim, but so far, in my mind, he achieved it. And this is obvious by the simple fact that nobody's even attempted to duplicate it. Say, he fell a little short here. It's a great head start. I'm going to improve upon it. So this is his introduction. Any questions so far? Okay, then we're going to dive much deeper in this. Even if you watched the introduction video that I made, this is going to be talking about things that are not there. There'll be an expert on Mishneh Torah by the time we're done with this, I promise. Okay, so the organizational structure. Very similar to the Mishnah, which was compiled almost 1,000 years earlier by Yehuda Hanasi. Remember, Yehuda Hanasi compiled the Mishnah. Then later, the Gemara is the commentary on the Mishnah. But from the time the Torah was given until Yehuda Hanasi compiled the Mishnah, there was really nothing written down about the oral law. It was kind of like, we had a Sanhedrin, we had a court, and they debated the issues of controversy, or what we're going to do about this. They would debate it, they would vote. The majority would win. It's okay, this is the majority decided we're going to permit this or we're going to prohibit it. And it was dispersed throughout the land. And that was really it. There was never really like a book form of what these rulings were. And then, new ideas would come up, and sometimes laws would be overturned, and it would be dispersed throughout the land, and everybody would understand, okay, it's not the law anymore. They overturned it. But there was not really a book or an internet that you could go to and say, oh, it was overturned on this date. So it was the Mishnah, compiled by Yehuda Hanasi, was really the first time that there was anything written down that we could read. Okay, this is what the law is. So the Mishnah was the first time we had that. So let's look at the Mishnah. There are 6 orders of the Mishnah. You can think of it as like 6 books nowadays, but they were called orders. Each order is divided into tractates that are called Masechet. Mesechot is plural, Masechet is singular. It's like what would you call it? I mean, it's just a section, I guess. Each Masechet is divided into chapters or parachim. A parak is the singular of parakim, or chapter is divided into paragraphs called mishnayot, or a singular is a mishnah. This may be a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with the lingo, but A Mishnah was supposed to be short enough that you could memorize it. And this is how it was taught. So each parak or chapter contains multiple mishnayot, which are short enough that each mishnah you can memorize. So each parak or chapter contains a bunch of mishnayot. Each chapter is in Masechet, which is sort of divided by topic, and each order has a broader scope, which contains many different topics that are going to be broken up into shorter mishnayot. It's going to get more clear here. Okay, so for example, again, we're talking about the Mishnah, not the Mishneh Torah. The Mishnah, let's look at the very order of it. The first order of the Mishnah is Zeraim, laws of agriculture and food. So Zeraim is the name of the Seder or the order. You can think of it as like a book. Zeraim has many tractates, but the first tractate is Berachot, blessings. We did a Talmud class here, and this is the first page of the Mishnah. We're reading Berachot. It's about the Shema. How late can you say the Shema? So that's the section is Berachot, but it's located in Zeraim. The first page in Berachot is dealing with the Shema. So that's the Berachot is the tractate. In Masechet Berachot, there's 9 parakim or chapters. We were reading the first page of the first chapter. And each parak has however many mishnayot in it. Each parak or chapter is different, but they each have some amount of mishnayot. So in the order Zeraim, the first chapter that we go to is Berachot. It's the first section. And then there's 9 parakim in there. The first one has however many, and the first one is dealing with saying the Shema. So that's what we read. So usually in citation form, we drop out the Seder. So we're not going to deal with, okay, it's in Zeraim. We'll just say it's in Berachot, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph. Okay, so the section of Zeraim that we're looking at is in Berachot. We're looking at Perek Gimel. This is like chapter 3, Mishnah Aleph. Aleph is the first Mishnah. So the first one in chapter 3 in section Berachot. This is usually what we'll call out. Does that make sense to everybody? If it's confusing, it's okay. It's going to become a little more clear how he organized it. So Rambam followed the same format, although he uses different vocabulary. The 6 Sederim, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, became 14. So we have 14 Sephorim, 14 books. Like the first one is Sefer Hamada. That's where you'll find the introduction that we just read. The last one is Sefer Shoftim, the Book of Judgments. Okay, so instead of 6 orders, he's got basically 14 books. Each Sefer is divided into groupings called Hilchot, meaning laws. Hilchot are divided into Parakim, chapters, and the Parakim are divided into paragraphs. Each one is called Halakha. So the formatting is the same, but remember, he's incorporating much more information. So that's why the Mishnah starts with 6 books, 6 orders of the Mishnah. Rambam has 14 because he's not just going through the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Remember, there's 2 Talmuds, 2 Gemaras commenting on the Mishnah. So he's going through all of those Gemaras from the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, as well as the Sifri, the Sifra, the Mechilta, and the Tosefta. So he's codifying all of that additional material. So that's why he has 14 books instead of just the 6 from the Mishnah. Okay, Mishneh Torah covers both Talmuds, the Jerusalem, the Babylonian, as well as the Baraitot. That's what I just mentioned. Three of the Sifra, the Mechilta, and the Toseftas. Okay, so this chart makes it a little more easy to understand for people that are like visually minded. Okay, so the Mishnah has 6 orders. Each order has many tractates. Each tractate has many chapters, and within each chapter, there's X number of Mishnayot. Mishneh Torah has 14 books. Let's say for Shoftim, for example, is the 14th one. So in the book of Shoftim, the 14th book, you'll find Hilchot Mamre. This is how the Sanhedrin deals with halacha. You'll also have Hilchot Malachim, laws of kings. So in Hilchot Malachim, laws of kings, we'll find Parakim, different chapters. So we'll look at chapter 11, and then in Parakim or chapter 11, Halakha 1. In a future era, the Sanhedrin will be reinstated. So if you want to know where do I find the laws of the future Sanhedrin, it's going to reinstitute Yovel. And as a result of the Sanhedrin saying Yovel is back on, we will once again be allowed to have Ger Toshavim, Noahides. Where do I find this? How do I know that that's going to happen in the future and not today? Okay, you're going to look at Sefer Shoftim, it's the 14th book, Hilchot Malachim, Laws of Kings, chapter 11, Parakim 11, Halakha 1, not Halakha 5, not Halakha 6, Halakha 1. The very first Halakha in chapter 11, Hilchot Malachim, which you'll find in Sefer Shoftim. That's how Mishneh Torah works. That makes sense to everybody? What about laws of conversion? Well, you need to know they're in Sefer Shoftim. I don't know if it's the fourth book, the fifth book, it's somewhere around the middle. Or it's in Sefer Kedushim, Sefer Kedusha. So get Sefer Kedusha, it's this book. You're going to find Hilchot Asuri Bia. It also has like Hilchot, Ma'aklot, Asarot, laws of forbidden foods. We don't want that. We want Hilchot Asuri Bia, laws of forbidden relationships. 22 chapters. Which one do I read? Chapters 13 and 14 deals with conversion. Okay, so chapter 14, Halakha 1. That's what tells you how to do a conversion. What you tell the convert, which is kind of frustrating about the table of contents, because if you know laws of conversion are in Sefer Kedusha, you got 14 books, you know which one to grab. There's lots of different sections in there. You know it's in Hilchot Asuri Bia. Great. I don't need to learn about laws of forbidden foods or whatever the other sections are in there. I know it's in Hilchot Asuri Bia. Which chapter? The table of contents says chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Let's see how many chapters there are. So, Sefer Kedusha. Okay, we know it's in this book. Hilchot Asuri Bia. Is it in Hilchot Ma'aklot Asirot? Is it in Hilchot Shechita? We know it's in Sefer Kedusha. We have this book. We know it's in Hilchot Asuri Bia. Which chapter? Okay, I don't see me on the screen, so I don't know if you can see this, but it says chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. They give you a page number. That's all it tells you. 22 chapters. How do I know where to find laws of conversion? This is what I don't like about the table of contents. It's you have to know it's in chapters 13 and 14. Okay, and then which halakha in each chapter, halakha 1, halakha 2, halakha aleph, halakha bet, halakha gimel. That's his structure. It follows this, but they're going to use different verbiage in the actual Mishnah. Now, is the Mishnah enough? If you want to know about the Shema, I need to know it's in the order of Zeraim. It's in Tractate Berachot. Which chapter? 1, Mishnayot 1. That's when you're going to start dealing about the laws of the Shema. So he organized it a little different because he went through all the commentaries on the Mishnah. But so there's a lot more material in the Mishneh Torah than there is in the actual Mishnah. But he followed the same formula of how you find the stuff. Probably confusing to people that are not familiar with the vocabulary. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if it helps you. If you have a specific thing, I still want to know, where in Mishneh Torah do I find this? Again, that's where the table of contents is not the best. I still recommend people get a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch just for the table of contents. If you want to know where, I don't know, what's the laws of Pesach, it's just easier to find quickly. But when you're really going to sit down and dive into all the laws, Mishneh Torah is where to go. The table of contents leaves a little to be desired. Okay, so the key feature of the Mishneh Torah, I guess this would be sort of a problem, is that he did not cite his sources. He omits the Talmudic references to avoid confusion and present a unified halakha. So this simplifies it, doesn't require the truth to be dependent on the personality of whoever you are quoting. Many people like Rashi, so they quote him. But what if another commentator disagrees? I've told you guys before, I'll never forget the first time I was in a synagogue on Saturday morning, and we were on the parsha where Moses kills the Egyptian. So I'm looking in the commentary there, and there's one opinion where the Torah pretty much just says that Moses he saw the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, he looked around, and then he attacked the Egyptian. That's all it really says. So in the commentary there's one opinion that he weighed his options. That's why he looked around. Say, am I going to get caught, or is there a good, reasonable expectation I'm going to get away with this? That's why he looked around. Then the other commentator says, no, it can't mean that. You're implying that he took matters into his own hands. This is vigilante justice. That's frowned upon. Moses was such a righteous individual, he would never engage in behavior like this. So it must mean when he looked around, he looked for the Egyptian's authority, his boss. Only once he could not be found, only then did he take matters into his own hands. Meaning he did engage in vigilante justice. But first, he tried to take the appropriate path. He tried to find the supervisor so that he could be dealt with in the legal manner. He tried to file a report. So, which commentator is correct? Truth is, we don't know. That's why we have multiple opinions. But we don't want people to say, well, which opinion was Rashi? Because whatever Rashi says, that's the truth of what Moses did. It shouldn't be decided by who's the more popular commentator. So this is why he left it out. He didn't want you to say, well, Rabbi Akiva said this, but Rabbi Eliezer said this. So that's why he left the sources out, which became sort of problematic for people that appreciate the debates. But where were we? That's why he left it out. People like Rashi, so they quote him. So what if another commentator disagrees? Why should the truth be attributed to Rashi by default? What if you get confused and you don't remember who the commentators were and you reverse them? Now you attribute this opinion to Rashi. Really, Rashi was arguing against that opinion. So which rabbi gets to beat up the other rabbi? It's controversial because it makes verification difficult. So later commentators like the Kesef Mishneh worked to identify the sources. So the Kesef Mishneh was written by Yosef Karo, who was the same one that compiled the Shulchan Aruch. But even there, he's not always sure where the sources are. If you get this version of Mishneh Torah, which I like because in the commentary, it'll tell you the Kesef Mishneh thinks he's getting this from this section of the Yerushalmi in the Gemara. But it questions, why does Rambam bring up this first half of this Gemara, but he doesn't mention the second half of it? This is why Yosef Karo in the Kesef Mishneh is not sure that this is where Rambam's source is, but he thinks this is where he's getting it from. So it's not always sure that this is where the source is. They asked Rambam, do you have any regrets about Mishneh Torah? He says, I regret not listing the sources. Not that he wanted the sources to be in Mishneh Torah, but it would have been nice for him to write a companion so that we could see where Rambam himself got it from and not leave this to other people who were sometimes critical of him to say where they think he got it from. But that's the reason why he left the sources out. He wanted you to be able to just use this as a final source of what the law is and not have to go through, well, this is why. This is who said it was. It was popular in this generation. This is what they accepted. He can just give you a final rule. Okay, so here is the book by book overview. Sefer Hamada, first book means the book of knowledge. Remember the Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of the Torah commandments, was originally the introduction. They separated it. So now in Sefer Hamada, you have a very long introduction. You have a list of transmission of smicha, going from Moses to Joshua to each person until smicha ceased. You have the chain of transmission there. You also, instead of having Sefer HaMitzvot, the 613 commandments and their explanations, now you just have the enumerations. It tells you which of the 613 commandments they are, but it doesn't give you the explanation of each. It gives you more stuff, and then it gives you at the end what we just read. The part explaining why this is for everyone of lesser stature, greater stature. So it's for everyone that can read it and be fluent in halakha. You don't need any other book. That whole thing comes from his introduction, which is found in Sefer Hamada, the first of the 14th books. It contains Hilchot Deot, laws of personal development. It also contains Hilchot Teshuvah, book of repentance. This is incomplete because it contains other things. Which I have right here. See that we also have Hilchot Talmud Torah, Hilchot Avodat Kokavim. We also have Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah. All of that's found in Sefer Hamada. So this is not a complete list. It's just a partial one. But you'll find Hilchot Deot, Hilchot Teshuvah. These are not actually books of halakha. Do this, don't do that. This is allowed, this is not allowed. This is sort of Mishneh Torah is a halakhic book, book of laws, but it does have things like these two chapters here: laws of personal development, repentance, not strictly halakha, more on moral character development. But 90% of maybe 95% of Mishneh Torah is law. But there are some things like this. It's not strictly halakha. Okay, the second book, Sefer Rahavah, book of love of God. That's where you'll find tefillah, tefillin, tzitzit, prayers, tefillin, which men will put on for prayers, and tzitzit, those tassels that we have on four-corner garments, sometimes used for prayer, like on the talit gadol that we wear. Okay, also he gives us a siddur here, which I recently had printed. Didn't come out perfect with the publisher that I had do it, but I'll probably have another one made. But so he gave us an actual siddur, which is very different than the siddurim that we have today. That has a lot of Kabbalistic things like Kabbalat Shabbat. All that came later after he died, which is why he didn't include any of that. So it's an older siddur. Ways to express your love for God. Sefer Zimanim, seasons, holidays, lunar calendar, and laws. How to calculate Rosh Chodesh, including trigonometry and geometry, like angles of the moon. Very complicated system, but it's included. Fourth book, Sefer Nashim, marriage and divorce, obligations of husbands and wives. Sefer Kedushah, fifth book, that's what we're talking about, the laws of conversions. Book of holiness, forbidden relationships. This is the Surah Bia. It has laws of kashrut, forbidden foods, linked as sanctification, sefer hafla'ah, articulation and verbalization, vows and oaths, sefer zeraim, agricultural laws, sefer avodah, temple service, sefer korbanot, sacrifices. Books 8 and 9, avodah and korbanot, are split. Temple laws into communal versus individual. So the temple sacrifices are different than the individual offerings, which now, since we can't do any type of sacrifices, we're offering prayers instead of animal sacrifices. So he split them into two different books. Sefer Tahara, purity, Sefer Nezikin, civil law, a systematic approach to torts, property, and courts, Sefer Kinyan, book of acquisition, Sefer Mishpatim, book of judgments, Sefer Shoftim, the book of judges. Books 10 through 13, they cover civil law, and the last one, Shoftim, covers governance, justice, and national leadership in Jewish law. This is why you find things like the Sanhedrin, laws of kings, when we're in the future, when we're going to have a king and a Sanhedrin again. That's where you'll find this. Several of these books have been split into two books because of the length, like Sefer Zemanim. This is where we find Hilchot Shabbat. It's so long, it's Sefer Zemanim 1 and 2. Two separate books. Okay, so that's how you get a set of 14 books. Other sets nowadays have added books like Pirkei Avot. So Pirkei Avot is Ethics of Our Fathers. This is a section of the Talmud. In Pirkei Avot, this is where you'll find the chain of transmission of Smicha. He gives it to us in his introduction in Sefer Hamada. Nowadays, there's sections where you can buy a set of Mishneh Torah where it's not 14 books, it's 18 books. Because some of them have been separated into two books, and they've added things like Pirkei Avot, where instead of just taking the chain of transmission of Smicha, like he did, and putting it in his introduction, they've added the entire Pirkei Avot to the set that they're selling you, which is why they can charge you over $1,000 for the set, even though they've removed Sefer HaMitzvot to sell that separately. So big money in selling these books nowadays. So they've reorganized. It's been reorganized, but Rambam himself rearranges the topics from the original 6 orders that the Mishnah did, and he arranged the topics thematically. So Pesach laws are split between holiday observance and temple sacrifices. And the way he reorganized it is not perfect. There's still some things where you have to look at multiple places. Like for the Noahide scam, for example, you have to go to Avodat Kochavim, where he says that we're no longer allowed to accept Ger Toshavim unless we have Yovel. And he makes it very clear. No Yovel, no Ger Toshavim. We can only accept full converts to Judaism. And he makes that very clear in his first book. He reiterates it again in the 14th book, chapter 11. But in chapter 8, he mentions that an opinion that when we have Ger Toshavim, if they accept the 7 laws and they believe this was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, then they get into heaven. What he should have done is reiterated what he said in his fourth book there in the 8th chapter. So you wouldn't have this problem that you have people taking that one sentence in chapter 8 out of context today. But from the time the temple was destroyed until he wrote this, we didn't have Ger Toshavim. Even after he wrote this, another 800 years, nobody was taking his sentence out of context. So it wasn't a problem. It became a problem about 50 years ago. If he would have reiterated what he did in his first book, there in the 14th book, it would have eliminated that problem. But it wasn't a problem, for 1,100 years until he wrote it. wasn't another problem for another 700 years after. How could he predict? But there, you do have to look at his first book and his 14th book to get the whole picture, which is why it's not in the middle, fifth book. Why don't you offer these people, these Noahites, as an alternative to conversion when he's giving us the laws of conversion? Because everyone knows you can't do that. So it's not perfect, but when you see how things are separated in the original Mishnah, you have laws to find laws of Shabbat. You got to go to 5 different places. It's a lot more concise. So it's not perfect, but it's a big improvement on the way he reorganized. Okay, there were controversies and criticisms. They didn't like that he gave no sources. They objected to, what's your reference for this? It's making it hard to verify and fact check his ruling. He admitted occasionally he could not recall what the sources were, but he stood by his conclusions. Look, I'll tell you guys all the time. I know that I read something, but I don't remember where the source was. Did I get this from somewhere in the Mishneh Torah? Some of them I know I've heard it more than once. So not only is it in the Mishneh Torah, but when I went through the Mishnah, I remember seeing it there. So I know it didn't come from the Gemara or from a Tosefta. I know it came from the Mishnah because I remember Rambam talking about it. Then I read it again in the Mishnah. Where? I couldn't tell you. Glad we live in an era where we have internet and we can look it up and find the source. He didn't have that. Everything was manuscript. How do you expect him to remember where he got the source from? So when he says he doesn't know what the source from, he's not saying I don't remember that there was a source. I made it up. He's saying I don't remember where it was. Was it in the Yerushalmi or was it in the Bavli or was it in the Tosefta? I know it's somewhere, but I don't remember where I got it. So I can't tell you what the source is, but he stood by it because he went through all of it and he's confident that he's correct in his conclusion. Okay. Claim to completeness. He asserted that only the Torah and the Mishneh Torah were needed. This angered scholars who valued Talmudic debate, which again, at no point did he say you can't go through do the debate. He just says you don't need to. Most people don't have time. Most people are going to struggle with the debates anyway. It's not always clear. The Mishnah, the debate's not clear. This is why we have a Gemara. Sometimes you get through the Gemara and you have more questions than you started with. And many times today, people will tell you, Yitzhak Ritowitz will tell you, we don't even know what the halakha is when we go and read the Talmud. So we're trying to find out what is the halakha when we go to the Talmud. So we don't even know what the halakha is when we go back to review it today. So this is what Rambam was talking about. Your average person doesn't need to do that. I'll give you what the law is. If you want to go back and read it, you can, but most people don't need it. It's not going to benefit them. This is done to eliminate all of that. So people get mad when they say this is all you need, but it simply correctly means that reading other books is not required. If you want to read the other ones, if you want to go to the debates, by all means, he's not telling you not to do it. It's just saying it's not required. So the goal was to simplify halakha for practical observance, eliminating confusion from Talmudic debates, which, if you ever go through the Talmud, you'll see it's not the easiest thing to understand. And this simplified it. I think he achieved his goal. So the legacy became foundational for later codes like the Shulchan Aruch. Debate continues over its authority versus Talmudic study. He's not the end-all be-all. People disagree with some of his findings. That's fine, but you can't invalidate. If I want to hold by the Mishneh Torah and you want to go by something else, fine. Go by the Mishnah Berurah. I can't stop you. But you can't tell me that I'm obligated to go by additional books. If you want to go to Mishneh Torah and stay there, it's 100% allowed. So Torah is a living system. His work shows Judaism as a structured, evolving tradition. This is kind of dangerous because, this is what reforms say. They take it to a whole new level, but I mean, it's not totally invalid. There are some arguments for it. It's an evolving tradition. We see this because he made revisions to his texts. He mentions in is Perusha Mishnayot. I explained this more in detail in my Mishneh Torah, which hadn't been written yet, which means he went back and revised it. There's debates over mitzvah counting. I think we talked about that in Sefer HaMitzvot. Fascinating how thousands of years after the Torah was written, we didn't even know what are the commandments. And people like Rambam saying we shouldn't have to keep 613, we can come up with a different number. Even today, in the year 2025, we don't agree what the Torah commandments are. Is it a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel, or is it not? If it is, why don't the people that say that it is take it seriously? You're going to say, well, I'm going to take this Torah commandment serious later, once I've made a good amount of money here. If my investments are successful, then I'll retire. Then I'll worry about fulfilling that mitzvah and moving to the land of Israel. Well, isn't that what reform does? They say this might be a Torah commandment not to eat this type of food, shrimp, crab, lobster. I'll take that one seriously later. All right. Well, if you're going to condemn one, you got to condemn the other for not taking Torah commandments seriously. If you value a system where a Torah commandment is to be taken seriously. We don't always understand how do we implement these Torah commandments. That's why we have halakha. Why do we care about halakha and not so much midrashim? Because the Torah commandments that we take seriously tell us to listen to the rulings of the court. Well, this is what the court said. We have to take halakha seriously because we're following the Torah commandments. So it's a legal system that makes sense to me. So that's a methodology that I value, but I do have to acknowledge not everybody follows that system. Even Orthodox Jews disagree about what is a Torah commandment. So if you're going to say that we don't even agree, then you kind of have to say when you're talking about reform, which I do not endorse, conservative, which I don't usually endorse, but they have some valid points. I don't totally view them as heretical. Then you have to say that they have some valid arguments to say we don't always agree what Torah commandments are or how to implement them. So you can't really just discredit everyone else because even in Orthodox circles, we don't agree. In the year 2025, is this a Torah commandment or is it not? Froom Jews don't agree. Pretty fascinating. Okay, but looking at the table of contents, you can see what a work of genius it truly was. Remember, the 14 books are called Mishneh Torah. Rambam gave it that name because it's a second to the Torah, meaning the first Torah is Torah Shebektav, the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, that's the Torah. The second Torah is the repository of all the interpretations that we call oral law, that were eventually written down in the Mishnah thousands of years later, and then the Gemara. And the Rambam made the claim that some thought was grandiose, that basically all you need is a Tanakh for the written Torah, and now you have my 14 books, Mishneh Torah. But one big book from the oral Torah, and this will give you the entire halakhic structure of Judaism. The problem essentially is that although the oral law was put into writing in the Mishnah and then the Talmud, both the Babylonian Gemara and the Jerusalem Gemara, which are commenting on the same Mishnah, but remember the structure, the nature of the Gemara is not to give you the final bottom line. The Gemara is a record of debate. The Gemara is a record of discussion. The Gemara is a record of machlokas, disagreement. Moreover, because of the unusual ordering of the Gemara, free association and the like, often subjects are not covered in one place. So the laws of Shabbat are, of course, in Masechet Shabbat, but they're also in Pesachim and in Chulin and in Kedushin and in Gittin, etc. So this is what I was saying, that when he reorganized it, it's much better. We have Hilchot Shabbat. It's long. It's divided into two books, but it's all Hilchot Shabbat. If you don't like Rambam and you say, I want to go to the Talmud to learn how to keep Shabbat, fine, you can do that. But we know to read the Talmud once, it takes 7.5 years. Look at all the different sections you have to go to. So when you go to a couple of these, you're like, okay, I have a good understanding of Shabbat, but you haven't gotten here yet. So you're going to find laws of Shabbat here that you didn't even know about in multiple different areas. And different sections of the Talmud. So it's much better the way Rambam organized it. You can just go to Hilchot Shabbat, read that, and you've got Shabbat. Again, it's not perfect, but it's much better than what the people before him had, which is why nobody before him even attempted. The Rif tried to do it off just the Babylonian Talmud and not even all of it. But that's what led him to take on this. But it was a big task. So big, nobody before him, and nobody since has even attempted. Okay, so he was confronted with a situation in which he basically felt that many people, maybe most people, were not capable of mastering the Talmudic discussion, which I think was true. And even if they mastered the Talmudic discussion, they were not necessarily capable of knowing what the halakha was going to be. So the Rambam says, I'm going to take all the work out of it for you. I'm simply going to give you a bottom line. The Rambam had great confidence, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but Rambam knew who he was. He knew the basic idea is not that much different from what we see rabbis doing today. They say, I'll tell you what the halakha is, and you know you're not as gifted as me, so you'll simply follow my directions because I know better. But still, we believe, of course, Rambam's motivation was L'Shem Shemayim, for this in the name of heaven. I mean, basically, if somebody feels they truly have come to the right resolution of Torah controversies, they have an obligation to share their conclusions. I do it all the time. You hear people say, the the rabbis decide what halakha is. Torah lo b'shamayim. Torah is not in heaven. Rabbis have to decide. It's just God telling you, you have to listen to the rabbis. God doesn't have the authority to make halakha. God said that's for the rabbis to do. They tell you this all the time. I read Bava Metzia 59b, and I say, you're interpreting this wrong. It's insulting to say God has no place in determining what we do. The rabbis decide. If you look at the narrative, the rabbis were punished for doing that. So, and the fact that they had to intentionally misquote Torah. They say Torah says follow the majority. It says do not follow the majority. The section that they quote, they chopped off the word lo, which in this context means do not. They intentionally misquoted it to make their point that the narrative goes against. So Rambam was right to say, this is the correct conclusion. So I think he was right to do it, and we all have the right to do that today. Interesting side note is that he was writing in manuscript form, and today, even a teenager studying for bar mitzvah can have a greater library than the great Gedolim of the 19th century. Although there's a counter argument to that, which is to say that this might not be a good thing because you get lost in this book says this, but that book says that. You can Google books that you haven't read. What does the Aruch Shulchan say about this? What does the Mishneh Brewer say about that? What did what's that rabbi? What did the Garden of Emunah say on this topic? And you can sound like you've read all these books, but you haven't. So that's kind of a bad thing. But at the same time, you can get through a lot more material than going through searching all these manuscripts if you even had access to them back then. Okay, so you can get lost in this book says this rabbi follows this, but this other rabbi follows that. So then there's an argument to reduce it down to a smaller library means you are able to focus and master the material. So I would argue if there's one book worth doing that with, it's the Mishneh Torah. In fact, I say this all the time. I don't think any Jewish kid should be able to get out of high school without going through the entire thing one time. It should be a mandatory one. So, that whole thing about don't fear someone who's practiced one kick 1,000 times instead you should fear the person who's practiced one kick 1,000 times because he's going to master it every time. I think you should master Mishneh Torah. So when you hear these rabbis saying, well, the Shulchan Aruch says this, well, if you're Ashkenazi, then you do this, but if you're Sephardic, do this. But if you're Sephardic, you need to follow this rabbi, but yet Avadia Yosef today said that you can do it this, although it's disputed because there is a rabbi today that says that. Why do you need it? It gives you the impression that you need to be familiar with the entire Sephardic history of all these. All right, so which one do I follow then? And then you do the same thing for Ashkenazim, and then you have to hold that it's different for both communities. It's to me, why would you dedicate your life to reduce less is more? This is what Rambam says. You can go by this, right? You don't like Rambam, you want to go by something else, fine. Nobody's stopping you. But I shouldn't have to learn 18 years of material. Just in case you ever ask me a question, I know what Rav Moshe Feinstein said versus what Rav Kook said, even though Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach disagreed with both of them. Oh, you're Sephardic. Then I have to know these 10 other opinions. I mean, you do you. If that's what you want to do. I find more value in reducing it down to Rambam. Master that as best you can. It just makes more sense to me. Okay, so I do want to point out a few things before we go further. In looking at that, although the Mishneh Torah is a work of halacha, the Rambam could not contain himself. Whenever he could sneak philosophical explanations into the Mishneh Torah, he manages to do so. This is what I was bringing up earlier in my Hilchot Teshuvah, Hilchot Deot. So there's some famous philosophical discussions in Mishneh Torah. For example, in Hilchot Teshuvah, it means to return, returning to the Torah's proper path. Usually is translated as repentance, though, but this is Teshuvah. There's a digression of 2 chapters on the idea of free will. We're going to go through, I think it's 10 pages about Rambam and free will later, not in this section, but it's going to be coming up later in the Rambam series. Okay, but there's a couple chapters there about free will is necessary for teshuvah. How can you do teshuvah if you don't have free will? And then he discusses all sorts of issues about Hashem hardening Pharaoh's heart. Where was the free will? That's not a matter of halacha, but he does sneak it in because since teshuvah is a mitzvah, and since teshuvah requires free will, he decided to talk about free will and raise some of the theological problems of free will in his book of Mishneh Torah, which is mostly halacha. So it's a famous and well-regarded discussion. And later on, we're going to go into a whole 10 pages about just that. So Rambam in the laws of idolatry, and the halachot of Avodah Zarah, the halachot of Avodah Zarah, the about all of the different Rambam creates. This doesn't make sense. Rambam in laws of idolatry, the halachot of Avodah Zarah. Comma there. Okay, the Rambam creates almost an inventory, or he almost invents a history of how idolatry came to be. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so I've heard this explanation before, but Chabad explains this, which I guess just made me assume that this was mentioned in the Talmud somewhere. But the claim is made that it's not. That Rambam is making this up. So I found that interesting. So the claim is that he invents this history of how idolatry came to be. If you go into biblical accounts, so from the Torah itself in Bereshit, there was Adam, then 10 generations, and then there was the flood, then there was Noah. So how does idolatry get introduced into the equations since there was a direct Mizorah from Adam Harishon? And the Rambam explains that originally idolatry was l'shem shamayim. It's done for the sake of heaven. In other words, they believed in God, the supreme God, but they thought it was not respectful to turn to God for their mundane little needs. And therefore, just as when you go to a king, you don't go to a king and complain about your garbage removal, you go to subordinate powers. So the origin of idolatry was mistaken theology that you pray and worship to subordinate powers, acknowledging that there is a supreme king above them, and eventually it degenerated into paganism. So the way I heard this was from Chabad saying that the same way, it started that obviously God was the creator. So the sun and the moon are servants of Hashem. If he created them, then we owe them respect. The same way if you're in a court, obviously you have to respect the judge, but the bailiff is there to serve the judge. So you owe a certain amount of respect to the bailiff. This is how this got started. That, well, if Hashem created the sun to give us light, to grow plants and whatnot, then this is a servant of Hashem, so we owe them a certain amount of respect. They went too far and started praying to them and creating idols, creating idolatry into this, but it was started with good intentions. This was the Chabad explanation that I heard. So I just assumed this is from some midrash somewhere. Yes, it comes from Rambam. So let's look at the first book of Mishneh Torah called Sefer Hamada, the book of fundamental knowledge. The first group of halachot in Sefer Hamada is called Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, the laws of which the foundations are the foundations of the Torah. So there's 10 chapters here, and only the last 5 chapters are halachot. For example, the halachot of martyrdom, giving up your life before worshiping idols, the laws about not using God's name in vain, and not destroying the names of God. That's in Yesodei HaTorah. Those are matters of halakha, what you do, what you don't do, and how you do them. But the first 4 chapters of Yesodei HaTorah are simply an Aristotelian description of the structure of the universe. Because he says that if you want to serve God, then you have to acknowledge God as the architect of the universe. So therefore, let me explain how the universe is constructed, and he uses Aristotelian spheres and everything else. Rambam is simply incorporating an Aristotelian view of the universe, which again was in the Middle Ages, and that's exactly how the science was understood as a matter of science. I guess Aristotle was popular all over the world, so everybody had his understanding of the way the world functioned. So this is where Rambam was getting his information from. This is what everybody thought. So I'm not just highlighting the idea that Rambam always tries to sneak in philosophical ideals, even in the middle of a halakhic code. He's giving you what everybody understood as science as the time. Okay, purpose and uniqueness of the Mishneh Torah. So it was designed as a comprehensive standalone code of Jewish law, distilling the entire oral Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, and later interpretations into a clear, accessible format. His goal was that it was going to be the last one, and nobody would write anything after that. But that was his goal, his design. He wanted to resolve the complexity and scattered nature of Talmudic debates, providing definitive rulings, pesach halacha, without the need for further analysis. Controversially, Rambam believed that his work could replace other legal texts. Though this vision was not fully realized in practice as the last one, it still is the foundation, core, and majority of future works, like the Shulchan Aruch. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch is 90 to 95% Rambam, since the deck was stacked with it being a compilation of the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. Rambam says in his introduction that the Rif is flawless. He can only disagree with him he can count the number of disagreements on one hand, which means a maximum of 5 times. So the Rif and the Rambam always agree, even if it's one of these rare occasions where the Rambam disagrees with the Rif. If on this occasion the Rosh happens to agree with the Rambam, then Rambam still makes it in. Because whenever 2 of these 3 agree, that's what goes in the Shulchan Aruch. These 2 almost always agree. When there's a disagreement, it's the Rosh bringing that in. So it's the Shulchan Aruch is almost always going to be the agreement with the Rif and the Rambam. So philosophical digressions. Despite being a legal code, Mishneh Torah incorporates philosophical and theological discussions, reflecting Rambam's Aristotelian influences. Free will in Hilchot Teshuvah, essential for repentance, with a digression on theological paradoxes, like Pharaoh's hardened heart. Idolatry's origins in Hilchot Avodah Zarah, Rambam theorizes idolatry began as a misguided attempt to honor God through intermediaries. Reasons for the mitzvot. In Hilchot Teruma, Rambam argues mitzvot have relating purposes, rejecting blind observance. Which, by the way, I mean, the same issue of creating, you know, idols, we started over again with the flood. So you're 8 people. So you're brought back to the same question. Right? Well, how did this happen again? You know, with Noah's family, the same way it happened with Adam's. So examples of halakhic philosophical blending: agricultural laws, Sefer Zerayim in the Mishnah, but Shemitah Yovel, located in Sefer Shoftim, Rambam links Shemitah, the sabbatical year, to the tribe of Levi's detachment from material pursuits. Okay, so we're discussing the laws of Shemitah, but he's going to turn this into a philosophical discussion, saying Levi was detached from material pursuits. So the purpose of Shabbat and the Shemitah year was not to work and not to work the land, so that you acknowledge Hashem is in charge. You're trusting the crops this year to actually provide for you for multiple years. The whole Shemitah year that you're not growing anything in the land, then the previous year where you were planting crops, and then the year after the Shemitah year where you start to plant, it takes almost a year for it to grow. So you're trusting the previous year to provide for that year, the Shemitah year, and while you're growing into the following year. So you're trusting that Hashem is gonna provide for you. So this shows that He's in charge. So the group that was on permanent Shemitah lifestyle was the Levites. They were dedicated to not working the land, but being spread out in order to spread their influence. They actually had 48 cities throughout the land. He writes in Hilchot Shemitah V'Yovel, the laws of the sabbatical jubilee, why did the Levites not receive a portion in the land of Israel or a share in its spoils along with their brothers? Because they were set aside to serve God and were therefore separated from worldly matters. They do not go out to war like the rest of the people. Rambam says that a person that devotes himself to Avodat Hashem in a complete way essentially can live the life of a Levite. So the argument goes that a Ben Torah could qualify as an honorary Levi in that way. I'm just making the point that he sometimes inserts philosophy into a book about halakha, but sometimes the implications of him doing that go beyond what he intended. For example, modern day people use this argument to exempt themselves from military service in Israel. Guess if you want to be a Kollel student and learn all day, this is the argument that you would make. So even though Rambam writes in several places in the Mishneh Torah itself that it is a Hilul Hashem, desecration of the name of God, for a person who is learning Torah to be supported by the community, and the derech of our Chachamim is to have parnasah, to make a living, like Hillel was a wood chopper. If you simply read the Rambam, he would not be in favor of Kollel. And that's why the Meforshim, the commentators, do somersaults trying to justify the practice of people being supported in their learning. And they say, well, in their time, people were great enough that they could also work and learn Torah. But today, we just don't have the same caliber rabbis. I've heard it taught before that the rabbis today, I've heard it. I've heard it taught that the rabbis today are like donkeys compared to the rabbis from before. This is a popular rabbi. He says that. I recently heard that all the rabbis today, the Gedolim of today's generation, do not equal the smallest toenail of Rambam, which is just an absurd claim. I mean, we can be so much more knowledgeable today with the technology that we have and being able to build off every rabbi since the Ramban. So it's just to me, it's an absurd claim, but these are the claims that people make. A-R-D there. I've heard it taught rabbis are like donkeys today compared to rabbis from before. Okay, whatever. I heard that somebody wrote 3 volumes trying to justify how Rambam said that you should be supported by your community, and he was against it. But if you have to write 3 volumes to kind of pretzel the Rambam and to bring pro Kollel, then you see how hard of a job it is. Okay, the Rambam's point is that you have to have Parnassah, so how can the Rambam then say to be a Levi? The answer is Rambam is talking about people who have such emunah in Hashem that they're willing to live on bread and water, meaning the Rambam was not saying be a Levi and have the Tzibor, the community, support you. That here, community, he was against being a burden on the community. He felt you should have a job and teach on the side. However, if your family wants to support you, that's fine if your family agrees to support you. So if your family is okay with having a life of no air conditioning, no cars, whatever it is, in order to do that, you have to have a family that goes along with it. So we have a famous statement of Rav Yisrael Salanter. This was the founder of the mustard movement. You guys know Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi. He's very popular in getting people to convert. He's after Balei Teshuvah, but many converts find him because he's on the internet. This is where he comes from, this mustard movement. So the leader of that mustard movement said, you cannot be a tzaddik, a righteous person, on somebody else's heshbon, somebody else's account. So if a person wants to live this way, it creates a great pain for his wife or for his children, then he'll have to reconsider. But the point is, there's nothing intrinsically evil about being poor. If a family says we're willing to live this way for a higher goal, that's what the Rambam's talking about. He's not talking about putting yourself on the tzibor and have them take care of you in all kinds of different ways. So if your family says, I don't want you to work, I'd rather you go and learn all day so that you can come home and teach us how to live a better life with a better connection to God, that's fine. But the Rambam was not in support of, of, of you not working and forcing other people to take care of you. But there are people that try and make it sound like he was, but he was not. Again, I just want to point out that the Mishneh Torah, unlike the later Shulchan Aruch, is not limited to the laws that apply today. After there's a temple, but the Rambam includes everything. It's the only code of Jewish law that includes everything, even things like giving teruma to a Kohen. Things we don't do today, but he gives you the law so you know how it functions, which is really good because you have to think it probably would today probably would be lost if he had not done that. So we don't do these types of things today, but he will explain how that functions. He also explains things like the korbanot, the temple service. So it includes architectural details like how do you build it? How do you construct it with diagrams? So this is before he even gets into korbanot. He says if you want to do the korbanot in an era where we're going to be allowed to do it once again, then you first have to know how to build the Beit HaMikdash, the holy house. The Beit HaMikdash, the sanctuary, it includes laws of utensils required for the service, including laws of entry. Tuma and Tahara. While mostly irrelevant today, we are all considered ritually impure since we don't have the ashes of the red heifer. So even if we are tamei, we can still daven, make barachot, and live our lives. However, laws of mikvah are still relevant. These laws still apply to sukkah construction, invalid material susceptible to impurity. So we can't use certain types of manufactured coverings or branches that have fruit because fruit is susceptible to impurities. So some of these laws are still relevant today, but he also includes the ones that are not. So he then discusses the following question. Should we look for reasons for mitzvah? Now, he actually says in the Mishneh Torah that there are some people who think you're not supposed to give reasons for mitzvot. If it's a mitzvah about serving Hashem, it's not supposed to make sense. Because if it's logical and it makes sense, then I'm not totally doing it for God. And therefore, some took the position that the highest form of avodah is when your mitzvot are irrational and they make no sense at all. This is almost the argument for not wanting to know the reason for getting tattoos. He makes a very strong issue with that. It says mitzvot are not just exercises in obedience. Mitzvot are educational tools to instruct us and inform us as to proper thoughts, proper ideas, and the like. Okay, so what people are saying here is that somehow, if you don't understand what the reason for a mitzvah is, that means that's your proof that it came from God. If it was written by man, then as people, we can understand their reasoning. A human would say animal sacrifice. Why would we make this a law? If it was a human like me writing it, I would say, do not harm the animals. I don't want to see them. So the fact that we don't understand why we have to do certain things, what is this aroma pleasing to God? What does that mean? Is it the actual smell of burning feathers? Or is it the fact that we know you don't want to do this? You're going to be moved by what's happening to the animal as a result of your sin. This is allegorical language. This is what's pleasing to Hashem. The fact that we don't know, that means it's God writing the commandment. So it somehow has a higher state of holiness that we don't know. We just know it comes from God. So when I put here, this is almost the argument for not wanting to know the reason for getting tattoos. It seems like this is the only mitzvah in the Torah that we don't want to know. It says we don't get tattoos. What does that mean? It means you can't get a tattoo, period. Well, when it says don't steal, we have 22 chapters of what are the different kinds of theft. What does it mean? Where's the chapters on tattoos? We don't know. It says don't tattoo yourself. We don't want to know. If God says don't do it, it means don't do it. We don't need an explanation. Well, don't you need an explanation for every other mitzvah? How come this is like the only one that like you don't want to know what the Sanhedrin said about it? You often teach you can't understand how to do any mitzvot. How do you keep Shabbat? What does this mean? You need a Sanhedrin to explain every mitzvah in the Torah. But there's no explanation for this one. They did explain it actually, but how come you don't want to know what that explanation is? This is the only one we don't ask. How do we fulfill this mitzvah? What does it mean? What questions were asked and what answers were given by the Sanhedrin? It says don't tattoo yourself. That's what it means. God says don't do it. Don't do it. Well, God says to chop the hands off of women. Do we do what God says? Nope, can't. Got to know the halakha. What about executing rebellious children? That's what God says. Do we do that? Nope, we don't go by what God says. Torah lo beishamayim. We do what the rabbi said. Well, what did the rabbi say about not tattooing yourself? We says don't tattoo yourself. That's from God. That's what we go by. Only what the Torah says. It's very interesting, very inconsistent. So there is halakha about tattoos, but today we're not supposed to know what that is. We're only supposed to go by what the Torah says, and not on any other mitzvah, only this one. So their explanation here is that somehow if you don't know the meaning of the mitzvah, that's because you can't understand it because you're a human, and that's how you know this is God instructing you on the mitzvah. Rambam says the opposite. He says these are not just exercises in obedience. You don't just say, well, God said this, therefore I don't want to know what it means. I'm like a robot. I am programmed to do what God says. I'm supposed to check my brains at the door. He says these mitzvot are educational tools to instruct us, to inform us as to proper thoughts, proper ideas, and the like. So personal examples of mine include the reason for learning Torah is to teach Torah. So if you're not teaching, then you are not learning. To just memorize, I know the last verse of Torah talks about what Moses did with a strong and mighty hand. I now know it says in the Hebrew Yad HaHazakah. I know that gematria is 14. So what? What are you going to do with that? If you learned it, how does that transform your life? How does that help anyone else? It doesn't do anything for you to learn this stuff unless you can teach it to someone else. Now the purpose has been fulfilled. Now you can help your life by helping other people. They can turn around and they can take these lessons and they can help other people. Now Torah is transforming people. So that's my example. Learning Torah doesn't really, it's not internalized. It doesn't manifest into something. Now, if you're a mystic, you think if I sit here in this room by myself and I learn Torah, I'm following a mitzvah. My Jewish soul is somehow releasing something into the atmosphere, and that makes the world a better place. Rambam's view is if I'm in a room by myself following a mitzvah, learning Torah, that has not transformed the world. It has to turn into actions that are tangible. So that's the purpose of the mitzvot, is to see the improvements that's going to happen from it. So that's my example. When I started teaching, I started seeing benefits, not only in my life, but in the life of other people that I was teaching. So this should apply to every mitzvah, not just the mitzvah of learning Torah, all mitzvot. In Rambam's opinion, and mine also, it should not be a mystery that we don't understand. We can't understand why Hashem gave us this mitzvah. I think there's a reason he gave it for us to understand. So it's a different philosophy. Okay. So if you're not teaching, then you're not learning. If you haven't learned it in order to be able to give it over to anyone else. There's also the example of the mystical and the rational explanation of the mitzvah to send the bird away before taking the egg. Um, there's an explanation there where there was a presentation between a rationalist and a mystic, where the rationalist explains that the purpose of shooing the bird away before you take the egg is because we're going to learn that if you shoo the bird away, you take the egg, the bird's not traumatized. It just comes back and lays more eggs. But if you take the egg and the bird at the same time, you're taking two generations at the same time, which causes trauma to the bird. It's unusually cruel because the only reason the bird stuck around to get her life taken was to protect the egg. So this shows us if we have to be mindful of the emotions of a bird, how much more so do we need to be mindful of the emotions of humans? So we can learn from this and we can teach it and we can transform our actions. The mystic looks at it completely different. If he's learning Torah in a room by himself, he's doesn't have a wife, doesn't have children, is not teaching anybody. He's learning this mitzvah of what to do with the bird and the egg. Something is the world is being transformed anyway, even with no actions. And the story goes on to say this was in Israel where somebody came to his rabbi and said, I fulfilled the mitzvah of taking the egg. Every time I go to the store, I take eggs off the shelf. But I've never fulfilled the mitzvah of shooing the bird away. So the guy had a bird's nest on his ledge. He said, for $600, you can fulfill the mitzvah of shooing the bird away. I'll let you shoo the bird away off my ledge. So then it becomes transactional. Do I get a reward in heaven because I fulfilled this mitzvah of shooing a bird away, where the other guy doesn't get that reward because all he did was take the eggs? So it's a different perspective. But I identify with the rational explanation of that versus the mystical explanation for it. So to simply try to separate a mitzvah from an underlying idea and say the purpose of mitzvot is an irrational submission to God, the Rambam writes, is defeating the very purpose of the mitzvot that are supposed to be vehicles for education, training, and insight, and therefore you have to have a reason. Another thing that I remember I used to think, oh, you can't understand anything in Torah because we're just incapable of comprehending why God is telling us to do this and that. It was explained to me, hey, you were in this geographical area. We're leaving. We're traveling to that area. The group can't just walk in and say, okay, we're an anarchist area anymore. You have to have laws. When you get here, you're displacing the people because they didn't follow my laws. You are going to follow my laws because if you don't, you're going to be exiled as well. So while you're here, you can't just have everybody say, well, I think this is his law. You know what? I have a different understanding of what the law should be. And now we have a death penalty associated with these laws. So everybody's getting executed for having a different understanding. When people do what people do, they say, well, there's a loophole. I can get around that. What about this new idea that no one thought of before? For controversial areas, you have to have a court. You go to the court. This is civil law. What they instruct you, that's what you need to do. If you don't, and this is a monetary fine, you pay the fine, like getting a ticket for traffic. Now we have cars, stop signs, now we have traffic tickets. We also have vehicular homicide. So is this intentional murder or is this manslaughter? These things come up. So to run a society, you have to have a government. It should be extremely limited because government is power, and we know power leads to corruption and people abusing their power. But for society to function and not be anarchy, um, you have to have government. So this is what's happening. You're leaving this system where you were oppressed by that government. You're going to a new area, and you're setting up a new form of government. It became no longer some magical thing that humans don't have the ability to comprehend. Every sentence is just something that you can't comprehend. It's now a logical thing that makes sense. Just like every other book that you're reading, okay, there's a message here that we're supposed to get when we read this. So it made the whole Torah so much more accessible when you now understand it's not beyond your comprehension. Okay, where were we? Many people today say that because of their DNA, their soul draws them to it, which is something they have no control over. So they don't need a reason. No matter where you put them, what continent you move them to, if you remove all literature, all education, they're going to be magnetically drawn to this somehow. This is what Hitler said, by the way. If you take a Jewish child away from his parents and you raise him in a non-Jewish household, you never teach him the Hebrew language, you never give him a Torah scroll, a Christian Bible, which references the God of Israel. He's going to do Jewish things because he has a Jewish soul, and he'll have no control over it. This is the claim that Hitler made. So this is what also many Jews say today, which they also teach in yeshivot, by the way, that because of the Jewish soul that you have, if you're religious, you're going to achieve great things. If you're not religious, you're going to achieve destructive things like bull in a china shop. And it's beyond your control because of the Jewish soul that you have, which is different than the non-Jewish soul. So it's extremely anti-Semitic to know history and know what Hitler actually said. Not anti-Semitic to teach the exact same thing in the yeshivot. So whether you're allowed to say these things or not depends on the group that you're in where you're having that conversation. This is what gets taught in both places. So Rambam is opposed to this type of thing being said, no matter who says it, because he does not make the claim that you have a Jewish soul which is going to draw you to it. It's something you have no control over, so you don't need a reason to be drawn to this. You're going to be drawn no matter what. Rambam does not make this argument. He makes the claim that we can use bribes of rewards and threats of punishments to the uneducated, which in his time, in his area, meant women and children, who, mystics today, would tell you have a Jewish soul. This uneducated Jewish child and this uneducated Jewish woman, who both have Jewish souls, which should be drawn to Torah, but for some reason are not, they need to be bribed with rewards of Olam Haba and threatened with punishments in Gehinom if you don't want to become religious. This is what Rambam says. You can use these bribes and these threats only in the beginning to get them to become religious. Once they become religious, they will remain religious for the right reasons. They will see that it's good to be Jewish. They will see the love of Torah and that God is a good God, and they'll be grateful for being a part of this religion. They won't need those threats or those bribes to become religious anymore. So he makes no claim that your Jewish soul brought you here. So this shows that for the uneducated, we can rely on the right reason without using that. We can use intellectual arguments for why it's good to be Jewish without requiring something that you have no control over, like what type of souls you were born with, which there is no way to verify anyway. So when you're talking to non-Jews, you can use these intellectual arguments to say, you know what, I don't know if you have a Jewish soul or not, and I don't care. You can obviously see why it's good to be in a covenant with God, no matter what type of soul you have, which there's no way to verify anyway. He says we should wean the uneducated off of the ideas that we lured them in with slowly. The ideas that we lured them in with is you're going to get a share in Olam Haba, or these bad behaviors that you engaged in, you're going to be punished with in Gehinnom. Because today people are indoctrinated with them, so you need to lure them in with them, but wean them off of them. Do not let them remain with these ideas. Bring them to the rationalist camp and discard these ideas. He discusses this in chapter 10 of Hilchot Teshuvah, but he goes into more details elsewhere. I think it's in the Guide for the Perplexed and possibly in Sefer HaMitzvot, because I've read them, but I don't know which one I read them in. Now, in the Mishneh Torah, he does not necessarily give you reasons for mitzvot, but let me remind you that in his last work, the Guide for the Perplexed, which was written after Mishneh Torah, he deals with a lot more of the philosophical reasons for things that might not make sense from a Peshat reading of some of the laws. Okay, so we dove a little bit into his philosophy there. So we have 4 books that deal with civil law. Sefer Nezikin. In English, we will call this the books of torts, damages, and damage to property, laws of theft, laws of robbery, and laws of physical injury is where a person might break someone's arm, escalating all the way up, of course, to laws of murder and the like. So Sefer Nezikin are the different types of damages, including theft and robbery, that one could do to another person, starting with property damage and ending with murder. Although you'll notice that here too, the Rambam snuck in something in Hilchot Roseach, laws of murderers, Ushimirat Nefesh. The last part is the protection of life. This is interesting. Now, after the Rambam discusses murder, he then discusses the obligation to preserve life. So he talks about things that are dangerous that you shouldn't do. So here he speaks a little bit as a doctor, and he talks about mitzvot like building a fence on a flat roof so people shouldn't fall off. So notice how he skillfully combines 2 things, that he combines the negative, thou shalt not kill, with the positive obligation of preserving and fostering life. Good, I did talk about what I did for the JPLF. I used a lot of his work for what I wrote for the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation. So I was a speaker for one of their meetings, and then I also went to a couple of their events as a representative, and then I wrote a long essay. It's on the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation website. You can go read it there. But I wanted to bring something that I never saw any of the other rabbis bring, because we all say the same thing: we're created in God's image, and every life is precious, and which is all true. But I wanted to bring something else, which is I went to a lot of people saying that it's part of our religion and that it's allowed in certain circumstances. And okay, I'm not going to do it, but I'm not going to get involved with what someone else does. So I really took the angle of, what argument do you have when you see someone else on an improper path leading to harm? You have an obligation to get involved and correct them and remove them from that path. And especially now that we have people saying, well, you're a non-Jew. So for you, you're allowed to do things. Well, according to the law, non-Jews would be executed for doing these types of things. So for you as a Jew to tell somebody they're allowed to do something that they would be given the death penalty for, it's no different than you telling them, hey, you could go rob a gas station and murder the clerk. They could be given the death penalty for. Halakhically, legally, you would be held accountable for doing that. If you tell somebody that you can go do something that they're punished for, and you advise them that it's allowed, you can be given the punishment that you advise them to go do. That doesn't happen today. We don't have a court that's going to do that, but legally, if you're going to go around advising people to do things that are illegal, and you're trying to follow halakha, then you should know it's not allowed. It's a big problem. So that's the angle that I took. What obligation do we have to get involved in other circumstances? But anyway, you can find what I wrote on the JPLF website, Jewish Pro Life Foundation. Okay, so you'll notice that the book of injuries, and then the book of ownership, the book of court systems. So the last four books are what we call civil law, corresponding to the fourth order of the Mishneh, which is called Nezikin. So the Rambam has four books corresponding to the fourth order of the Mishneh, which is corresponding to the fourth volume of the Shulchan Aruch, which is called Hoshen Mishpat, the breastplate of judgment. Rambam split it into four different books. The genius of his work is the organization, and this work is frankly amazing considering the amount of primary source material that he needed to extract rulings on every one of these areas. The work took a minimum of 10 years, possibly up to 18 years. The dates are not exactly clear, but a minimum of this was 10 years of work, and Rambam was proud of this work. So you see, this is just another fascinating thing about 4, 4, 4, 4. I'm not so big into the numerology, but people that are, they can use that as part of their reason. All right, I think we're almost to the end of it. Okay, his confidence versus reality. He predicted that his work would become the ultimate halakhic authority. In my view, it is and can be for anyone who decides it to be. But it instead became foundational for the theoretical debate. The example, Kesef Mishnah, the Radbaz, commentaries are launched off of it. So it wasn't the end of this type of work. It was a springboard that launched a bunch of new things. The criticism and adaptation. Later scholars, Ramban often disagreed with his rulings, but engaged deeply with his ideas. The Mishneh Torah's influence persists in yeshiva curriculum and contemporary halakha. The modern relevance is you can't learn halakha without the Rambam. You can't read commentators without references to the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch is at a minimum 90% Rambam. Philosophical tensions is rationalist approach to mitzvot, like sacrifices, as a concession to idolatrous tendencies. That's his view. Contrasts with mystical or traditionalist view, Rambam versus Ramban view of animal sacrifice. As a Rambamist myself, I disagree with him on his view with animal sacrifices. I actually agree with Ramban on animal sacrifices. I disagree with Ramban on most things. I disagree with Rambam on most things. But it goes to show if you value what Rambam did, you are not required to follow what he says 100% of the time. You are allowed to disagree with him, as I do on certain things. And this is why people say Rambam's not the end all be all. I don't have to go by Rambam. That's true. You don't. But you also can't prevent me from doing it. And when I do go by Rambam, most of the time, I do not have to endorse ideas that I disagree with. This is the world that we live in. It's also on my channel. This is a 100% valid way to paskin halakha today. Is they teach this in Mishneh Torah and in Or Sameach. For all of you who's Jewish, Pentaliyid, you're allowed to paskin according to Rambam. today. Even if you're not even in a smicha program, you are allowed to hold by any of the Rishonim, including Rambam. This is getting taught in the yeshiva today. So anybody that tells you, "Oh, we don't go by Rambam," you can't go by Rambam. You can't go by that. You have to learn. You have to ask your rabbi. All they're trying to do is discredit what you're saying. They're trying to tell you your argument has no validity, even though your argument is being taught in multiple yeshivot today. You can take the video off of my channel, show it to them if you want, and then they'll tell you what an idiot I am. I guess what an idiot all the rabbis in the yeshivas are, or how they actually mean the exact opposite of what they're teaching in the yeshivas, because their local rabbi says something different than what they teach in the yeshiva. So anyway, those videos are on my channel if you want to use that. Okay, Shevet Levi and Torah study. Rambam's ideal of scholar living like Levites, detached from materialism, is invoked to justify the full-time Torah study. Though he emphasized elsewhere emphasizes self-sufficiency, parnasah. So they don't like what he has to say, but they'll take parts of what he said philosophically and say, look, that means today he would endorse this behavior that he was against. So they're still using the people that don't like him. They're using his material today to justify what they want to do, even though he was against it, like they do with Noahides. He was 100% against it. They take one sentence out of context and try to pretend like he endorses it. He was 100% against it. Okay, so this is the original Chat GPT of Halakha. You want to know Halakha? Ask Mishneh Torah. You don't have to go through all the books. You can just look it up in Mishneh Torah. Then, if you want to check the source, then you can go see where Mishneh Torah gets it from. But this is the cheat sheet. Mishneh Torah is the original. I want to know what the law is. What does it say? Boom, there's the answer. Mishneh Torah. You don't have to go through all the debates and all the different answers to come to conclusions. You can just go to what's the answer. It's in Mishneh Torah. The conclusion, the Mishneh Torah is a paradox as a code. It failed to replace other texts. We know this because we have things like the Shulchan Aruch. He wanted it to be the final ruling, so there would be no more codifications, and we have other codifications. So he failed in his goal in that sense, but it did succeed because you have people like Yemenite Jews today, the Temani, they go by his work exclusively. They never cared about things written afterwards. They hold only by Rambam, which is another point. Now, you can't go by Rambam today because it's popular to go by other rabbis. So Temani are not valid Jews because they go by Rambam only. Why are they allowed to? Why are we required to go by other Ashkenazi rabbis? Like, why do I care what some rabbi who left Russia said? What effect does that have on me? I have no effect on Yemenite Jews, has no effect on me. I have no obligation to care what Russian Jews say. So they go only by Rambam. They teach in yeshivas today. You do the exact same thing. Oh, here it is. Ken Spiro teaches at Esha Torah. Even today, any Jew, even ones who are not in a smicha program, can paskin halacha if they go by Rambam or any other Rishon like Rashi. Although I'm not sure why he mentions Rashi. Rashi is a commentator, doesn't really deal with halakha. Rashi deals with midrashim, but that's the Ken Spiro at Esha Torah saying any Jew today can paskin halacha according to Rambam. That's the video. It's a short video on my channel. It's a work of genius, as we've discussed. It revolutionized Jewish laws organization and remains a cornerstone of Torah scholarship, even when interpreted differently than he intended. Our final thought is that sometimes success is not what you envisioned. Hashem may have other plans for your legacy. So his success that he envisioned was for it to be the last book ever written. Instead, it became the foundation that all the other books are now built off of. So not the vision that he had, but still a very commendable one. So he intended Mishneh Torah to be the definitive code of Jewish law, eliminating the need for further debate. Instead, it became a springboard for analysis and disagreement, notably by the Ravash, Rabbi Yitzhak ben Sheshet, and others, the Ravad, Rabbi Avram ben David, who critiqued his rulings often, starting with the introduction. Critiques of the Mishneh Torah, the philosophical content. The first four chapters of Yesodei HaTorah is Aristotelian cosmology. They were controversial, akin to critiques of the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. Some communities banned the story of the Moreh Nevuchim. Lack of sources. Rambam omitted Talmudic sources for brevity, not to clutter up the Mishneh Torah, which became cluttered with commentary, although I'm kind of glad that the commentary is there, even though he didn't want it there. It is useful. He later regretted not publishing a companion volume with references. This was on one of the critiques of the Ravad. The Ravad would say, who are you to say such things when rabbis bigger than you didn't agree with some of the statements? So a companion would have been nice to avoid having the Kesef Mishnah being what we get to track down alleged sources. This is what Yosef Karo says. He says he wrote the Kesef Mishnah to say, I think this is where Rambam gets it from. It would have been better to have a companion by Rambam himself saying this is where I got it from, to not be included because he didn't want it cluttered up. But unfortunately, we didn't get that from Rambam. So Rambam did say that he regrets not doing that. But we can't really blame him for being overwhelmed with the unprecedented task, which to this day nobody's been able to duplicate, especially when it wasn't even what he was doing full time. Remember, he was working as a doctor full time, traveling. He was doing this on the side. So, replacement of Talmud study is under critiques. Some accused Rambam of undermining Talmud study, though he denied this in his letters. Although he does make it sound like one could eliminate the study of it, which is true, although that does not mean you're not allowed to go study it. So he just says in the introduction, you could eliminate the requirement of study in order to know the law. He also mentions one should split his learning into three parts: Torah, halacha, and how halacha was arrived at, which I take to mean the Torah, the law being the Mishnah, and how was the law arrived at. To me, that's the Gemara. So he says this is what you should split your learning into. Those three parts: Torah, halacha, and how halacha was arrived at. So I don't really think he said you should eliminate Torah study. You just could eliminate it if you want the law and now go to Mishneh Torah. So in reality, one could and perhaps should study that, but perhaps now that we have Mishneh Torah, one could also choose not to study the sources. The still don't have a systematic program to study other Boraitot. They still do not have. Okay. They still do not have a system to program to study the other Boraitot. So we have the Daf Yomi now if you want to study the Talmud. But what about the Sifri, the Sifra, the Mechilta, and the Tosefta? What's the systematic program to go through that? You don't have one. So why not just go through Mishneh Torah, where he went through all this for you, 3 chapters a day, 1 year, he's gone through all of it for you. So if you don't like that he did that, you can't even go through all the material that he went through systematically. So they don't have an alternative. Okay, halakhic authority. Questions arose over his unilateral decisions between conflicting Talmudic options or opinions. If there are 3 opinions, who gave him the opinion to pick which one was correct? How can he decide that halakha is opinion 2 and not opinion 1 or 3? How does Rambam know what the final decision is? Well, what gives anyone that authority today? After the closing of the Talmud, who decides disputes today? Again, this is where Hilchot Mamrim is key to understand how authority functions. There are people today who cannot follow the decisions in the Gemara, who just need the final ruling, which was true in his time also. He studied, Rambam himself studied Talmud with his students. So I think the opposition to the favor that the Rambam was doing for the Jewish people was that other rabbis wanted to gatekeep the power that he was handing over to the people. Example, three rabbis' opinions over wearing a tallit on Friday night comes to mind. I told the story before about how I say if a woman wants to wear a tallit on Friday night, there's no prohibition. It's 100% allowed. She can do it. Another rabbi said he tells her no because it's tallit is now a man's garment. She's a woman. There's a Torah commandment you can't wear a woman's garment. So I say she's allowed because it's not prohibited. He says it's a woman's garment. That's like cross-dressing. You're not allowed to do that. The third rabbi said I was wrong to say she could wear it, even though he agrees with me. It's not prohibited. And he disagrees with the rabbi that says cross-dressing. It's not cross-dressing. So if you agree with me that he's wrong for calling this person a cross-dresser, and you know it's not prohibited, why do you say he was right to tell her she can't wear it when you disagree with his reason? And why was I wrong to say she can wear it when you agree with me it's not prohibited? And that rabbi said, because it's only required to do it during the day, so even though it's not prohibited, it's our tradition to not do it at night. Yet that rabbi had a guy wearing a tallit that Friday night. So if you say you can't do it, even though it's not prohibited, and you disagree with his reason for saying you can't do it, why are you letting people do it? He got mad. He said, I told him it was inappropriate to wear it. I have not yet escalated to tell next step, which is telling him to take it off or leave. So literally today, you have three different rabbis on three different opinions on something on the same topic. So who decides? So this is what the rabbis were mad about. How can you, Rambam, say the final decision is a woman can wear a tallit on Friday night? What if we want to argue about it and come to different conclusions? Who gives you the authority to say the final decision? And well, Rambam basically just said, now if you want the answers to these things, you don't have to go ask these three rabbis that are arguing about three different opinions on one topic. You can go to Mishneh Torah and get the law. You as an individual, you as a woman that wants to know if you can put this on Friday night or not. You don't have to go listen to these three rabbis, get three different opinions about the same thing. You don't need the debate. You don't even have to go to the Talmud if you don't want to. You can just go to the law. So rabbis were mad about that. They liked the debate. They said, who are you to make the final decision? How dare you allow people to have this type of power? We're gatekeepers. We need them coming to us and asking questions. This is what gives us jobs. This is what we charge them for. We make them support us. So we don't have to go get jobs, in the private sector, working like the rest of the people. This is what makes us, first class citizens. What do you want us to do? Get jobs working as doctors, and lawyers, and truck drivers, and teach Torah on the side? This is what we charge them for. We can't do that if they can get the laws themselves. So they didn't like that he gave this power to the people. Okay, structural oddities. This was criticized. Certain laws, like mourning, Avel, and honoring parents, Kibud, Av Be'em, they were placed thematically awkwardly in Sefer Shoftim. So he figured after talking about the judgments where people were executed, which means now people are dead, he might as well put the laws of mourning since now we're discussing dead people. The ironic thing is, though, that when people are executed by the court, we don't mourn for them. We don't sit Shiva because these people did something wrong and therefore they separated themselves from the Jewish people when they did what they did, which was wrong, which is why they were found guilty in a court and sentenced to be executed. So we're not executing a righteous Jew. We're executing someone who decided they're not Jewish. They're dead to us. They're kegoye. And so much later on, mystics came in and said, no, they have a different type of soul. They're still one of us. But that didn't exist until after Rambam's time. Okay, Messianic prophecies and Noahide laws appear in Hilchot Malachim without clear contextual fit. What he says in Avodat Kochavim, this is the first book in Sefer Hamada, chapter 10, Halakha 6, should have been repeated here. A person who accepts these 7 mitzvot is a ger toshav. A ger toshav may be accepted only in the era when the laws of Jubilee are observed. In an era where the laws of Jubilee are not observed, however, we may accept only full converts to Judaism. This would have eliminated the taking Hilchot Malachim, chapter 8, Halakha 11, out of context, even though Halakha 10 of the same chapter and Halakha 11 provides more ignored context, meaning they go to Hilchot Malachim, chapter 8, they don't read chapter 10, they don't read chapter 11. And these people, by the way, they praise Tovia Singer. He goes around and says, well, what does Isaiah 53 say? Oh, well, what does Isaiah 52 say? What does Isaiah 54 say? Oh, he's so great because these Christians take one thing out of context. They don't read what happens before or after. Those same people will do the exact same thing. They take chapter 8 out of context. They can't tell you what chapter 11 says. They have no idea, nor do they care what chapter 10 says, nor do they care what Avodat Kochavim says. They want only the one chapter that fits their narrative, which is debunked, in the same before and after chapters. So again, if Rambam would have taken what he said here in Avodat Kochavim, chapter 10, Halakha 6, and reiterated it here, they would not have been able to take this one sentence out of context. But Rambam assumes that you already know this because this is in the first book. This is the 14th book. He assumes you're going to read the chapter, 10 and 11, not just 8. But unfortunately, this started happening about 50 years ago. So you can't blame him for predicting they were going to do this. So had he predicted that, that would have eliminated the problem today that we have with the Noahide scam. But again, I can't fault him. Okay, there's an anti-Karaite agenda here. He subtly countered the Karaite practices like emphasizing Shabbat warmth, marital intimacy to oppose their asceticism. They would not allow a fire at all on Shabbat, and required cold food. Karaites said Shabbat should be like Yom Kippur, no mitzvah night. This was sort of fighting against Karaites by instituting that we have to have candles, so we're not sitting in the dark. We do not extinguish existing flames like Karaites would. So he was warring against Karaites, even though he later said we should be sympathetic to them. But at first, he was very against the things that they were doing. He viewed them as like enemies. Despite critiques, the Mishneh Torah remains a monumental work, admired for its systematic brilliance, even as it spurred ongoing debate. Okay, we're going to stop here. The next one, if you have not watched the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, if you're following along the Rambam series, you can go watch that one. This has more information that's not in there. If you've already watched it, then watch this one. Then the next one coming up, we're going to get into the Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed. We're going to stop the recording, and we'll see you all on the next section.